welcome to Beyond the Paradigm. I'm your host, Paul. Well, I just thought I'd do a short episode today because this topic that I'm going to cover is relevant for what's going on in the world today. Obviously, we can see so much chaos and it can be so alarming for people when they're watching the news. In Matthew chapter 24, verse 6 of the Bible, Jesus said these words, "And you shall hear of wars and rumours of wars. See that you be not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet." It is important to know that Jesus is here prophesying of these wars, which we know are going on now, and rumours of wars. But his advice here is to be not troubled, for it all must come to pass. Do not be distracted when watching the television. Constant media coverage is going to give you the impression that nothing else is really happening. So when you keep seeing a story in the news constantly, now obviously it's the Israel Hamas conflict that's going on now in Gaza. Previously it was the situation in Ukraine. But what you've got to do, and this may sound silly, but you need to understand this. You've got to look for what is not being covered, what they're trying to distract you from, because it is being used as a distraction. Because understand that stories are picked to be circulated and they're also picked to bury. So the stories that they're burying that could be on the news and probably should be on the news. Do not listen to just one news source. You've got to look at a variety of news. I look at a variety of news on the internet and on the TV, and then you can make your own mind up about what you think's true. But you've got to understand when watching the news, every news report you see is heavily edited. Every minute of that production is edited, and reporters and editors have a subjective viewpoint. And TV images are not real. Each image is actually narrowly focused, and it's not the same as being at the place of the event at the time of the event. Francis Schaeffer, the late American theologian, said this: "The physical limitations of the camera dictate that only one aspect of the total situation is given. If the camera were aimed 10 feet to the left or 10 feet to the right, an entirely different objective story might come across." Now, I've seen an image online that demonstrates this perfectly. It's two pictures. One of them is of a news reporter, and it's obviously the view looking down the camera, and the news reporter is stood there, and behind him there is a group of people protesting. But then there is another picture of the same image, but it's a zoomed out picture, and when you look at it, there's only a handful of people stood behind him, and to the left and right of him it's pretty dead, and there's just the odd people walking around getting on with the daily business. But if you look at the first image, which is the image that you would see as the camera is filming, you would think he was stood in a place where there is a big protest going on, and that was a deceptive image. Jesus talked of wars and rumours of wars. Now, we're in 2023, and just in this century there's been many wars. There was the war in Afghanistan, which began in 2001, following obviously, as we know, the September 11th terrorist attacks, and that continued for several years, around 20 years, involving various parties including the United States, UK and other NATO forces, the Afghan government and insurgent groups, which obviously was collectively known as the Taliban. Then obviously there was the Iraq War, which began in 2003. That was also a US-led invasion of Iraq, and the subsequent occupation lasted for several years, and it led to significant instability in the region, and the instability is still going on today. Then there was the Syrian civil war starting in 2011, and the Syrian civil war has been one of the most protracted and complex of conflicts in the 21st century, involving multiple factions, including the Syrian government, rebel groups, and extremist organisations like ISIS. Then we've got the Yemeni civil war, which a lot of people don't know about, and it's a conflict which began in 2014 and it escalated into a full-blown civil war. It has also involved international intervention, primarily led by Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. Then obviously there's this new war that's started, the Israel Hamas war, which obviously began just this month in October. Now this has the potential to escalate much further, especially with the Americans bombing targets in Syria. You could potentially face the Iranians coming in there, and then potentially if Iran gets involved, you could be seeing the Russians. So the potential for this to escalate and become very, very serious very quickly, it's on the brink, this one. It's teetering on the brink. And obviously there was the Ukraine-Russian war, began 24th of February 2022. Well, that escalated from when the Russians penetrated into Ukraine and annexed Crimea, and obviously it's escalated from there, and that's a war that's still ongoing now. And there's also various regional conflicts going on. In the 21st century, it's seen many conflicts in parts of Africa, and for example South Sudan, Mali, and there's also tensions in the South China Sea. In that verse in Matthew, where Jesus talks about wars and rumours of wars, he says this: the end is not yet. But take note of this: there will be an end. He says the end is not yet, but in that verse, obviously he says the end. There will be an end. There will be a final culmination of this age. There will be a time when there will be no time, when it'll be all over. And these events that we're seeing today on the news, these are events that are leading up to the end and to the second coming of Jesus Christ.